So I think with that we are ready for our Q&A.
Magically appeared.
Yes, and I'm gonna ask some of these questions. I don't know if they're still accepting. I think they are still accepting orange cards. So if we get through these, we'll keep on going. Let's see. Wow. Okay. So here's a question for you, which says this: Thank you for sharing your story, Julissa. I'm sitting up here almost breaking my neck, nodding in agreement. I was undocumented from the time I came at 4 until early adulthood. Thank you for not making us feel alone. Do you feel you still struggle with any shame or quote unquote little brown girl syndrome? How do you overcome that, if so?
By the way, this is one of my favorite parts about doing these types of conversations is when I hear other people say, I was also undocumented, because I can't imagine before actually sharing my story saying I was undocumented, because there was this sort of source of shame. And the biggest reason it became a source of shame is because again of the negative connotations that are associated with being undocumented. So when you hear on TV people saying you're a rapist and you're a criminal and you come here to take, well then you don't want to be associated with those things. So you don't want anybody to know that that's what you are, right? Because you're not those things.
You don't look like a bad hombre to me.
Oh, I wrote about that. I wrote about all the bad hombres in my life and how wonderful they are. But, I sometimes get in trouble for saying this, which is, like when I walked into the room at Goldman, when I walked into any room, I'm not fully thinking I'm walking in as a brown girl. I'm not thinking I'm walking in as a Latina. I'm just walking in as a human being. Right? And that's not to say that I reject any part of my identity. I embrace it fully and celebrate it. I do think though that I'm no longer ashamed. And it's been incredibly freeing to share my story. Because every time I share my story, I become more empowered by it. I become more empowered by the things, when you were talking about Twitter, I mean, I get trolled on Twitter a lot, like hard sometimes, when people call me all sorts of names, where people think I should be, like I said, deported. When people say, you don't pay taxes, and then I show them my how much taxes I'm paying, and they say, well, you're a criminal because you use that fake social. So I'm like, sometimes it feels like I could never win, right? Like I can never, and it becomes sometimes discouraging just to know that, how do I even engage in dialogue and conversation when that's the starting point? I don't know if I answered your question, but no, I'm not ashamed about who I was anymore and the experiences that I have. In fact, I'm actually proud of them and empowered by them, because I think my story is not just an immigrant story; it's an American story of resiliency. That's what it is. And when I think about the fact that immigrants, not just the immigrants of today, but the immigrants that have built our nation into what it is, they were willing to risk their lives, to cross oceans, to walk through deserts. And we don't do it to come get on welfare, because if all we wanted to do was to just get by, we would have stayed where we were. That we come here to make the country great.
It's literally, it's that hunger, it's that drive that has been the fuel for America, its progress, its growth, its productivity today. And, it continues, but people's immigrant stories are unique. Here's a question, actually, from somebody who's asking literally about that. Given your prominent role as an advocate for undocumented immigrants, how are you uplifting and empowering the general undocumented population and the intersections within it? Sort of reflecting the fact that not every person who is in that status is a DACA candidate, or somebody who's able to kind of rise up and overcome those boundaries as you have. So age, race, and sexual orientation, how those reframe the narrative for undocumenteds, and what can you say to those sort of intersections of identity?
Yep. So I have to be careful with the sharing of my story, because there is this risk that by sharing my story, I create this division between like what is considered a good immigrant and a bad immigrant. And if you are working in our fields and doing some of that labor, then we don't want you here. But if you're a good immigrant who is working in technology and doing these things, like we do want you here, right? And that's a very dangerous dynamic to create, because all of us are human beings and deserve to be treated with dignity. And when it comes to like intersectionality and a lot of times I think like this boxes that are created for identity are boxes that weren't created by us, right? Like when I look at like these forms that you have to fill out for like race and ethnicity, like Latino, Hispanic is not a race. And so under race, it'll say like white, black, Pacific Islander, Native American. I'm like, I never know what box to pick, so I just always pick other, because I don't know where I fit into these boxes. And the reason those boxes don't apply to me is because we didn't come up with those boxes ourselves, right? Somebody else that doesn't actually know about our identity created those boxes. And that's the same when it comes to like immigration. I told you in the green room, I was so excited he's Asian and that we're having this conversation at the Japanese Museum, because oftentimes immigration gets tied to being a Latino-only issue and then a Mexican-only issue. And the fact is that there are undocumented immigrants from every part of the country. And we're talking about African undocumented immigrants. And the fact that immigrants do get criminalized quite often. And when someone is a black undocumented immigrant, they're being criminalized for being undocumented for being black. Right? So there is a lot of connections that we need to make among the different social justice issues that we're all trying to fight for, because at the end of the day, to me, they're all still the same struggle, which is a struggle for equality.
And, to that point, that struggle has gotten harder. I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that. I would say whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, the notion that things are easier for especially undocumented immigrants, but I would say immigrants in general, after the election is certainly questionable.